Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the first ever Charting the Course to Equity Coalition Town Hall. My name is Jennifer Childress, and for the past 4 years, I have been the Area Development Director for the United Negro College Fund here in Los Angeles, California, and I'm a proud member of the Charting the Course to Equity Coalition. Tonight, we will engage in a candid dialogue with public school students, parents, and educators from across the state of California. We'll discuss the essential nature of racially diverse, culturally responsive school leadership from TK, that's transitional kindergarten, through 12th grade in the era of COVID-19 and beyond. But we won't just stop at a dialogue. We'll also invite all of you to engage with us as we take action towards diversifying, identifying, and supporting racially diverse leaders. But first, a roll call of our coalition members and colleagues here today. If you're affiliated with a particular organization, please type your name and your organization's name into the chat so that I can shout you out. And if you're here as an individual, welcome, just type your name. As you're doing that, I'd like to start the roll call by introducing the 11 members of the Charting the Course to Equity Coalition who have co-sponsored tonight's event. The United Negro College Fund, Loyola Marymount University, Teach for America Los Angeles, the Association of California School Administrators, Energy Converters, Education Leaders of Color, or EDLOC, Education Board Partners, Innovate Public Schools, Charter School Collaborative, California Charter Schools Association, and the Diversity in Leadership Institute. Thank you all for being here. I also want to welcome all those joining our live stream via Facebook and YouTube Live. We're so glad to have you with us. And if you care to share, please be sure to include the hashtag DILI Coalition Town Hall. That's Diversity in Leadership Institute, DILI Coalition Town Hall. And finally, a big, big thank you to all of our coalition members and to all of you joining us this evening. Get ready for a power-packed lineup. And now, a word from Dr. Laura McGowan Robinson, CEO of the Diversity in Leadership Institute and founder of the Charting the Course to Equity Coalition. Dr. Laura McGowan Robinson is a lifelong educator who began her career as a Chicago public schools teacher before moving west and becoming a high school English teacher and literacy coach with the LA Unified School District. She went on to serve as executive director of Crown Preparatory Academy in South Los Angeles, which is now part of the STEM Prep School Network. Thereafter, she served as the Senior Vice President of Regional Advocacy and later as the Chief Operating Officer at the California Charter School Association, where she spearheaded the work around racial diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially as it relates to the education leadership pipeline. She now continues this important work as CEO of the Diversity in Leadership Institute. Please help me welcome Dr. Laura McGowan Robinson.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. And thank you to our coalition partners. Before I begin today, I cannot move forward without acknowledging Jacob Blake. Yet another shooting of an unarmed Black man, point blank in the back. Black people are 3 times more likely to be shot by police than white people. As a Black woman fighting alongside so many others, I need to stop and acknowledge the collective pain, disgust, and anger we feel. The wound that is not allowed to heal but for yet another bullet tearing away at the flesh of another Black body. I pause here to acknowledge Mr. Blake, his children who witnessed their father being shot, his family, and his community. He is a father, a son, an uncle, a brother, a friend, and a human being. We will continue to say your name and so many others. Jacob Blake. The ongoing pandemic of racism and racial violence we're facing has not only demanded educators look at the implications of our ways of doing school, but to level it and reimagine it. Prior to the pandemic, it was no secret that students of color, particularly Black and brown students and low-income students, are underserved in our schools. COVID-19 has not only shone a bright light on these inequities, but widened them. As educators of color and communities of color, we must reject the idea of going back to status quo. Status quo has never served communities of color and low-income communities well. It is time to create a new standard of excellence for our children. This evening, we are centering the voices of parents and students. Too often, educators make decisions in the absence of the most important voices in educational systems, our students and our parents. What do they want to see in our schools? What new standards of excellence would they like to see in our schools? The Charting the Course to Equity Coalition is a collective of 11 organizations and institutions committed to creating and sustaining a racially diverse pipeline for educational leaders in the state of California. We believe that collectively we are stronger and have dedicated the time and resources across our organizations to address racial equity in educational leadership. California is among the most diverse states in the union, but is among the least racially diverse when it comes to its education workforce, with 25% of teachers and 20% of administrators identifying as Black or Latinx, while 60% of California's public school students reflect those same populations. Not only does our coalition believe that representation matters, we have the data to prove it. According to the CCSA study, Charting the Course to Equity, K-12 Leaders of Color and Student Success, based on publicly available data in the state of California, on average, students at schools with a leader of color scored significantly better on state tests, especially at high schools. On average, students at schools with a leader of color graduated significantly more prepared for college and career. On average, students, especially African-American students, were suspended at significantly lower rates at schools with the leader of color. As a result of this study, the coalition issued a call to action committing to do the following: conducting further research on culturally responsive leadership approaches by leaders of color, identify and amplify leaders of color who yielded the results highlighted in the study, moving from theory to practice by partnering with institutions and educational leadership programs in the recruiting, preparing, and retaining leaders of color, including the collective voices of parents, students, and educators to highlight the academic and school climate impact of Black and Latinx educational leadership. In the spirit of including the collective voices of community, we will start by hearing the voices of parents and students. Following the voices of parents and our student speaker, we will hear from our educator panel. They will respond to the questions and commitments the parents and student put before them. The educators will share what they will do and what role they see themselves playing in reimagining a public education system that has far too long worked for some, but overlooked so many. Tonight, a student will start our conversation, Tiana Young. Tiana is a high school senior in Compton Unified School District, where she is student body president at her high school. Tiana was instrumental in bringing students and faculty together to engage in a conversation after the killing of George Floyd. One of the primary responsibilities she's assumed as a student leader is creating safe spaces to facilitate difficult conversations. Now let's hear from Ms. Tiana Young.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tiana Young. I'm 17 years old, a senior, as well as the Associate Student Body President at Dominguez High School. I'm so happy to be joining you all for this magnificent event because it is a cause that hits very close to home for me. Growing up in the Compton Unified School District, I've always been surrounded by adults who look like my peers and I. This often overlooked privilege has always brought me comfort and inspiration. It allows me to feel seen and understood on campuses, whether I realized it or not, because I was surrounded by people who had my best interests in mind. Especially when it comes to helping me in situations that can be detrimental to my academic career or my mental health. Throughout this journey, there have been many key exchanges that continue to remind me of the importance of the work I do as a student leader. I've spent all 4 years of my high school experience doing what I can to encourage students on campus through forms of student government, civic engagement, and community building. The constant inspiration of my efforts comes not only from the students I encounter, but also the educators who continuously empower my faith in my work, as well as the work going on around me from said adults on campus. Around this time last year, I found myself sitting in my then principal, Blaine Watson's office, pleading to be removed from a class that I was in no way prepared physically or mentally to take. After being turned away at every level of leadership, I had reached my last option. After a long hour of discussing and wild emotions on my end, I was changed into a class that I felt comfortable in. From the views of an educator, he understood the reasons I should have stayed in the class, but more importantly, from the views of a Black student who's just doing their best, he understood why I needed to leave. Within the next few days, I was moved into a new class with a new teacher and a new welcoming environment. Although I left his class with a round of tears forming my eyes, they came from a different place within me. Instead of a place of sadness and frustration, they came from a place of happiness and relief. I left his office feeling confident and satisfied with the results. I felt heard. As a highly engaged student, I can confidently say that any different outcome from that situation would have negatively reflected not just in that one class, but for all of my grades. But after receiving the proper guidance from the caring hand I needed, I was able to complete this year with nearly a 4.3 GPA, along with 3 A's in separate dual enrollment college courses. Despite all this happened, I had a great year academically because of my personal drive. But I want us all to take into consideration the students who do not hold the same value for school as I do. A student who might have stopped at the first no, with a different student or a different administrator, can bring a completely different outcome. That empowering moment for me could have been of a downward spiral for another. That is why I believe it is so important to have Black and Brown educators present and prominent in schools that contain more than just Black and Brown students. Educators that can lead with a steady hand, yet understand and work to meet the needs of their students. With that being said, I'm asking that as leaders and teachers, you pledge to continue learning and growing, to remember that your actions can bring a significant change in a student's life. I ask that you pledge to work towards incorporating more Black and Brown teachers, counselors, and administrators on campuses to provide students with the same growing and learning opportunities I received. My question for everyone here is, what are you going to do to ensure your actions will leave students with a positive experience and encourage them to continue their growth as individuals? Thank you.
Thank you, Tiana. Thank you for sharing your powerful story. I know that we're in good hands with leaders like Tiana. Next up, I'd like to introduce our parent panelists, Felicia Jones and Dr. Jessica Borrow. Felicia Jones is the Associate Director with Congregations Organized for Prophetic Engagement, COPE, in San Bernardino, California. COPE trains and mobilizes clergy, parents, youth, and community leaders as grassroots organizers to build people power to fill its mission to revitalize their communities in which they live, work, and worship. In this role, she supports the organization's multi-issue social justice organizing through campaign strategy, policy advocacy, and grassroots leadership development. She continued her focus in education advocacy as the Director of Community Engagement and Advocacy with Families in Schools, a parent advocacy organization, and served as former board chair and deputy director with Cadre, a South LA-based parent-led organization who works to ensure that all children are rightfully educated regardless of where they live. She's a graduate of Mount St. Mary's University and a single mother. Dr. Jessica Borrow is the CEO of Education Experience, a full-service coaching and consulting service focused on inspiring positive outcomes for scholars. She draws upon her career experiences in public education to ensure scholars across all school types have access to equitable and exciting instructional programs. As a nationally board certified teacher, former school administrator, and current education coach and consultant, she lends expertise in both school design and management. She is a Teach for America proud alum, LA02, and she worked as a classroom teacher for 8 years, both in traditional public and charter schools. After leaving the classroom, Dr. Borrow transitioned to leadership at Valor Academy Charter School as the founding director of curriculum and instruction. When she's not inspiring others to be have their best education experiences, she enjoys spending time outdoors with her amazing husband, Noah, and their 2 awesome children, Nathalie and Benjamin. Join me in welcoming our parent panelists today.
Hi, Felicia. It's so good to see you again.
You too. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, actually. So proud of myself. Today was our second day in distance learning, and I have my kinder baby and my first grader totally on Zoom, all on Schoology. So we were successful today. What about you?
Awesome. Yeah, likewise. We're now into our second week. My son is a senior, and so he's adjusting. Okay, it's an adjustment, but we're making it though. He's doing well. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
so good. I'm a senior, you're leaving, and I'm just coming in the door. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. It's been an amazing journey though. I'm excited that we are at the senior year, and he's had pretty good experiences. In fact, much of his upbringing has been with teachers of color. He started his educational journey in schools that are primarily educators of color, and he's done well in those environments. How about your babies? How are they doing, and how are their teachers this year?
So, because everything is virtual, we're going through the process now of starting school with the kindergartner. And although he won't be able to physically be with his teacher, the blessing is that his teacher was Natalie's teacher last year. So we have the same commitment in the household. And for our family, I am a proud Black woman. I wear my crown everywhere. And my daughter is such a reflection of that grace also. And she has had, for her first 2 years of learning, both of her teachers were Black women. And it's something about being able to go to class and see a representation of self. She was always confident and happy and just felt like she was right at home when she was in the classroom.
Wow.
So the protective filters were lowered. And for my boy, it's just so comfortable now because when we started the beginning of the transition to pandemic distance learning, last year he was able to see his sister do this with the teacher he's doing it with now. So it's just really been a blessing upon my household to have such strong women in the family.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel the same. This year, my son has an African American male teacher, and he's already said that he's his favorite teacher. And there's some things about him that's pretty unique. He is a former football player. My son is a football player, scholar athlete. He went off to college, came back to the school district that he graduated from, and really has made a connection just even in these short 2 weeks. In a way that, I can see my son leaning into him as a reflection of what he hopes to be. And he's seems to be very encouraging. So I'm really excited about that. I'm glad he's found a teacher that he connects to, and so personally from, as an athlete and a scholar.
Absolutely. It's important to have representation of self, especially for our Black boy scholars. There's so many pressures put upon them before they even get to class each day. And all those things in their invisible backpack dissolve when they're able to be confronted with a teacher who resembles them, looks like their family, looks like their neighborhood. So I'm so excited that my babies have been able to have their first few educators be women of color. And even if all the way to their preschool days, they had women of color as their teachers as well. So it's wonderful to have Latin women, African American women, Asian women, all cultivating the learning and the progression of my babies. I'm just so happy.
Yeah, likewise.
Yes. So talk about what experiences have you had with your son that you can potentially share with me?
Yeah, well, there have been a lot. There's been a lot, and I tell you on that point about just having our children exposed to, a diverse group of educators who are Black and brown, and who look like us. We've had some pretty good experiences, both in the classroom, but also the administrators. And so one of the experiences I had, and when your baby gets to be in the middle school and when the hormones start popping, this is when you'll remember this story, this experience.
Yes.
I remember in middle school, my son, as most kids go through their hormonal changes, and started to have some behavioral issues. And wanted to flex really his manhood for the most part, and sort of challenged his the school administrator. But this man, African American man, was so gracious. I really love that he chose to, he could have disciplined him, but he chose a different route. He actually chose to cultivate his leadership.
Yeah.
And you know, and fortunately we had a beautiful relationship. When my son started to sort of misbehave, we were in communication with each other, and and I was concerned that he was going to be punished. But the administrator was so open to taking a different approach with him, and invited him into student leadership, gave him opportunities to represent the school externally. And that did so much for him in terms of his own confidence and growth. And I guess I would just, you know, from mom to mom, just be ready to, be ready to walk that journey and know that that journey is coming. And prayerfully, you will have an administrator who is like-minded in that way. Yeah.
I'm taking, especially the communication piece, something about being able to communicate with your child's teacher outside of campus times, because it doesn't just stop. Your parenting doesn't stop when school starts and ends. And it's a lot to be able to have those touch points, have the number. I like that you shared that you were able to communicate with him, you connect with him. So absolutely, it's just something about communicating is so supportive, knowing that I have access to you in some small way, via email, text, it doesn't matter.
Absolutely. And this time, you know, we're in a pandemic now, and how we communicate is so critical to keeping students and families engaged. And I think this is one of the things that I pray for our students and our educators, that they are making those critical connections. Unfortunately, so many of our kids are getting lost, and we know that our kids are lost because they either don't have access to the technology, because the school administrators are overwhelmed with trying to adjust to the pandemic, and students still suffer and families still suffer in it. These are just things that I certainly think should be top of mind for all of us. How about you?
The digital divide is really what concerns me, because as an educator and also a parent, I feel our house is set up for success, and it's still daunting. So my concern lies in scholars who do not have access, or scholars who are in multi-generational households. And one of the beautiful cornerstones of our culture, and of a lot of scholars of color culture, is that we have grandparents in the household. We have aunties and uncles. It's very multi-generational, but the fear is that they don't know how to necessarily use the technology that is demanding of our scholars now, because that's the only way that they're learning in the virtual program. So my concern is really just the access for our scholars. And then what are we doing when we have our parents that are working? Or working parents who have access to be able to be there. And with the financial divide of the pod coming on, I feel that our scholars are just being farther and farther left behind. So how can we ensure potentially that we want to make the learning day a 24-hour cycle? Our scholars access to YouTube clips, or letting the teacher record the lessons, so that once mom or dad gets home at the end of the day, I can still feel like a success. My parents still feel like they provided for me, and that there is no disconnect. So really, that's something that I feel like we should do. We can do this to connect with families in the pandemic.
Yeah, we've started something new that we sort of can't go away from now. Absolutely. And parts of this is working for our kids. I know my son, he misses the social interactions. He misses, being in the classroom, but he loves having access to the learning program at whatever time that works for him. And it works for me too, because my work day doesn't end until pretty late. But fortunately, we're able to stay up late together and work on stuff. And it's working for him, and it works for me. And I think those are things that we should continue to embrace. When and how our students learn, and not necessarily, punish them or they lose credit if they don't comply with the program that a regular 9-to-5 program.
Absolutely.
Our students learn very differently.
They do very differently. I think it's important for us to realize too that we have some parents out here knocking it out the park. And so I think that as educators, I want to tap in just in a jealous way. I want to tap into what some of these parents are doing at home because we are not the experts. We're in passion as parents, right? So how can we pull from some of the successes happening off campus? And then also, how can we ensure that we're able to, when we get to the other side of this, identify which scholars work better in a virtual environment, which scholars need to be in a physical environment, and which scholars might just need a hybrid. I think this is something of us as a people, and it's going to be interesting to see how we reshape our new normal.
Yeah, I agree. And I love what you said about parents being part of the learning process, because there's so much happening at home, and that people are doing some pretty amazing things around incorporating what happens at home into the learning. And I think that's a way for us to continue to deepen that relationship with educator and parent, and really for the benefit of the student who can learn in so many different ways. You know, I'm always concerned that we oftentimes approach our parents with a bias, and we already assume that their home environments are not necessarily conducive to learning. Absolutely. There's so much learning that can happen, and you know, we make judgments all the time about parents. You know, I have this experience, unfortunately, with a counselor who I ran into and had a challenge with, because he immediately looked at my son and looked at me from a deficit approach. Didn't really take time to look into my son's courses, what he had remediated, the fact that he was actually on track. And the first thing he did was to discourage him out of going to a 4-year college. Wanted him to go into a junior college. And while junior college is fine, my son, both me and my son had deeper plans, and really he had worked very hard and continues to work very hard to stay on the A through G track and to be college ready for a 4-year experience. But we, you know, unfortunately, that bias shows up in ways that can really take our students off course. Unfortunately, I jumped in with some, you know, in a pretty fierce way and probably agitational way. Yeah, I had to go into mama mode and really, you know, advocate for my son and for what I knew was right. But I think it speaks to how we have to really continue to challenge our educators and administrators and counselors. Yes. To really challenge their own bias as it relates to students of color, and challenge the limitations that they put on them. Yeah. Right.
Because parents send their best to school, right? No one wakes up in the morning and says, okay, let me find my most rat-tatted kid and send them out to the world, right? We're doing the best we can. And when we collaborate and see each other as partners in the work and lose all those adversarial boundaries, we'll really be able to flourish. So I'm so glad that you were able to stick up for your baby. And I am just heartbroken that there's another example of another scholar not provided adequate choices.
Yeah. Well, this is not, unfortunately, you know, these are the same biases that have been passed on generation to generation. Absolutely. And you would think that we can disrupt this cycle, and we should be really trying to disrupt this cycle of limiting students of color. I do think that's why having educators and administrators who are culturally competent really be in front of our students really helps to really give them what they need, because they know how to help them navigate. In my son's case, his counselor, a Latina female who saw his transcript, saw that he had made a couple of mistakes early on, decided that he could get on track, and she did everything possible to make sure that he had every course that he needed. Right. And we're proud to say that he's going into his senior year. He's already like, Mom, hey, when can we start applying? That's the difference maker for me, and I'm so grateful to have been exposed to that. So I could go on and on, girl.
Yes, I understand because when I have my scholars and we graduate them and we send them off to high school and they come back and they give me some of these updates, it's heartbreaking. So I found myself being a forever sponsor who I can go in for scholars and be the mama bear because I have parents that are working. But one thing about my commitment is ensuring that I am a member of the community for my scholars that I serve. So if you have parents that can't show up for you because I'm committed to your legacy, my number won't change. My email is the same. It takes a village. It takes all of us standing in collection and saying, you know what, collectively, we can get all these babies.
Yeah.
You know, they all better.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, as we're thinking about this, and I, you know, we have this moment to talk amongst ourselves, but there are some questions I would want to share with educators, and that is, you know, I think what I've learned is the power of really parent and educator relationships and communication. And I guess my question would be, will they commit to empowering parents of color to really incorporate them into the learning experience, so that they, you know, so that they really get the best out of our students? How about you? Is there something you would want to say?
Yes, I want to know what can we do to ensure we're creating patterns of excellence for our scholars and community. We're not going back to what was. That's just out the window, right?
Absolutely.
We need to ensure that our babies have choice and access. So what commitments will you make to ensure that my scholars and my communities have choice? Will you commit to hiring more educators of color? Will you commit to hiring more counselors of color? Will you commit to training parents and members of the community who can all step in together and support our babies? None of us alone. So will you commit to these things?
Yeah.
The answer.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that answer. I've got one more question that I want to ask the educators in the next panel, and that is, you know, punishment has been so often associated with the classroom. I hope they will commit to really disassociating punishment and student behavior, really looking at both the personal growth needs of students as well as their academic needs. And for my son, he just needed somebody to lean into his leadership potential. For others, it might be they need a little bit more academic support. But I certainly don't think we should be over punishing students when we know that there's other needs that should be addressed. So I hope they will commit to really saying let's think differently about punishment and really lean into what students need.
Literally tearing down the systems of white supremacy and racism that have been the foundation of our educational system. So will you commit to being anti-racist, anti-bias, anti-white supremacist, and eradicating these systems that have plagued our community since the onset of education in America? Can we ensure moving forward that our students will have education that is excellent and access? Access and choice. I just want my babies to have choice.
Likewise, that's some good stuff. I look forward to hearing what they say next. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it too. It's so nice to talk to you. I can't wait to say thank you so much. Panel, we can't wait to listen to your responses.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, parents. And what great questions and requests for commitments. I'm looking forward to digging into these questions with our panel. I just want to remind our folks who've tuned in of the hashtag. If you want to make comments, it's at the bottom of the screen, DIL Coalition Town Hall and DIL_Institute. So we'd love to hear from you and keep these great comments coming in. It's just wonderful to see the level of engagement from our parents, from our teachers. It takes all of us. And so thank you all so much. So I want to introduce our educator panelists. So Minya Cole is a 5th grade teacher in LA Unified School District. She's been an educator for 13 years, working both at middle and elementary school levels. She holds a master's degree in literacy and reading education and specializes in using culturally affirming approaches to classroom management, curriculum design, and instructional practices. Minya has served as a teacher, a reading specialist, and a literacy coach, and delivers professional development to support schools in implementing blended learning and balanced literacy techniques. Blaine Watson, who's the principal of academics at Locke High School in Watts, Green Dot Public Schools. He led the successful turnaround of Manuel Dominguez High School in Compton Unified. Under his leadership as principal, Dominguez High School earned full accreditation through 2023, increased the graduation rate over 90% for the first time, and fostered a stronger college-going culture as evidenced by a 12% increase A through G completion rate, and a 79% increase in the completion rate of the career technical education pathway. Prior to joining Compton Unified, Blaine served in several leadership capacities in urban school settings across LA. Blaine has also taught high school level English as a second language in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and at the university level in Quito, Ecuador. Currently, he also teaches as an adjunct professor at the school leadership program at Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. Blaine holds a BA in Communication Studies, a BA in Spanish Language and Literature, and an MA in Educational Administration and Policy Studies. He's currently working on his doctoral degree at USC, pursuing an EDD in Educational Leadership. He's committed to educational equity and has an unwavering belief that all students can and will learn, and understands that student leadership, adult empathy is at the heart of truly a restorative school community. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have Dr. Juan Santos, who's the Director of Mentoring for CALSA, California Association of Latino Superintendents and Administrators. Dr. Santos has served diverse students in both suburban and inner city communities, having experience in different capacities across elementary, middle school, and high school, and university settings. He's received high honors in various roles, including Teacher of the Year and Administrator of the Year, holding a Bachelor of Arts in History and Political Science, a minor in Ethnic Studies, a Master's in Teaching, a Doctorate in Educational Leadership, and Pupil Service Credential in Counseling. Dr. Santos emphasizes the need to extend our capacity to learn for the betterment of professional and personal growth, and more importantly, serving others. He serves as Director of Mentoring for the California Association of Latino Superintendents and Administrators, CALSA. He sees the value in mentoring, especially through CALSA mentoring program. Currently, he's an Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources for Lawndale Elementary School District. He's served in different district and site level positions for over 20 years. It's Dr. Santos's love for training and mentoring aspiring leaders and superintendents that shapes his actions, memberships, and his desire to assist others to be their best. I'd like to thank you all and welcome our panel. Thank you for joining us for this very important conversation. And I just want us to dive right in with our panel, our student panel question, or student keynote question, and our adult panel questions, our parents. So let's start with the question that Ms. Young posed. I would like to begin by restating the question. And then from there, we'll hear the questions from Mrs. Jones and Dr. Borrow. So Tiana's question, and before I get into that, I'd like to commend Mr. Watson on how you supported her and how she was struggling with making the decisions about staying in the course or leaving. And let's start with your response to her question, which is, how will you ensure that your actions will have a positive impact on students of color and encourage their continued growth as individuals? Oh, I think Mr. Watson, do we get your audio?
Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry, I'm here. So first of all, I want to thank you, Laura, for giving us the opportunity to share, also to share in Tiana's wonderful leadership ability. I am so proud of her. I love her and I miss her dearly. So Tiana, I think she's an example of what it takes to be a very, not just a culturally confident leader, but also just having the empathy that leaders of color need to have, and to have the opportunity to bring students to the table to lead with leaders and teachers in schools. You mentioned an example of how Tiana, we were struggling after the horrific murder of George Floyd. We were struggling with, I was struggling with how to really engage the community. The first thing I did was call Tiana and I asked her, Ty, I need help. I don't know how to really engage the community. And I asked her what she thinks we should do. And my idea was just to have a series of conversations. And she came up with this wonderful idea of having what we call the Don Wade discourse. And she facilitated, she organized these conversations and told me, Mr. Watson, I just need you to be just a listener. You bring teachers to the table, you bring alumni to the table, you bring parents to the table, and I'll facilitate it. And I was impressed with her organization and how thoroughly she thought through the problems and the issues for our kids. And I also think that part of your responsibility as a leader of color in working with students of color is always asking for the input and the feedback of your students, whether it's a focus group. Another example is what we've done called the Principals Advisory Committee, hosting a range of kids who can come together, A students to D and F students who come together and really talk to you about what you should do differently to make school more relevant and more supportive for our students across the campus. So those are a couple examples of what we can do to have a positive impact on students of color in our campus as educators of color.
Please, ladies first.
I'd love to hear from Ms. Cole. I was going to ask her in the classroom in response to Tiana's question. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited and slightly anxious and nervous to be here this evening. When I heard Tiana's question, the part that stuck out to me the most was when it said growth as individuals. Mm-hmm. Whenever I'm coaching teachers that have behavior management challenges, the first thing I ask is, do you know your students? Not do you know their name? Do you know your students? There's a lot of work that identifies the fact that for Black students especially, but Brown students also, their cultural identity is central to who they are before they're even thinking about learning. And there's a great deal of work you can read, Young, Gifted, and Black, which is a collection of essays which actually goes into that. So if we don't know our students as individuals, then we can't expect to be able to push them and have a positive impact on their life. And as a woman of color, as a Black woman, I can't assume because I look like my students that all of a sudden we have this natural connection. I still have to strive to know who they are to the core of their being. And once I do that, then I can provide an education program for that individual student, which sometimes means 25, 30 separate educational approaches in my classroom. I can provide a program for that individual student that best fits who they are as a learner so that I can ensure that they have a really powerful, positive, impactful experience.
Thank you for sharing. And Dr. Santos, what are your thoughts on this wonderful student question we have before us?
That's a powerful question. To be honest, from the beginning, recognize our color. We need to recognize her life. It's important for us we hear this often, to listen, but no, hear what they're saying. These are kids, that their lives matter, but more so much that they're loved. For me, it's important that I not only share that, but that I enforce that in a district to recognize, to build the confidence of our individuals, because you know what? They should have choices. The fact that they don't, or that we're talking about changing a normal, the normal should have never happened. I mean, our students have been struggling for years, and so it's important that we, again, recognize who they are as people of color, that what they are overcoming or what they have to go through daily, as she mentioned. I mean, we have to recognize that their lives are beyond just what happens in the classroom, but what happens outside. Our babies are growing up too fast. And so I think it's important that we help our educators in the classroom, all of our classified employees as well. It's not just the teachers, but everybody on board that we are raising, we're raising our future, that everyone's involved and everyone has a part in this. So for me, what she asked for me is, how do I ensure it's reinforcing those key tenets to make sure that you hear what they're saying and that you recognize who they are. All lives matter. Yeah, but Black lives matter, Brown lives matter, and they need more. They need more. So let's be true. Let's get to the point. It's about equity, what they need to be successful. And we've always been down. I don't want to hear it's got to be one over the other. No, Black lives matter, Brown lives matter, and we need to provide our students who are going through so much the power that they need to achieve what they're supposed to achieve, and that's the greatness.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate all of your responses to Tiana. I know she's listening and appreciating the responses and having her voice heard by educators. I want to bring up our parent questions, Ms. Jones and Dr. Borrow. And they posed a question. The first question they posed was, how are you as educators creating new patterns of excellence for our students of color? We're in a pandemic. We're doing things that we never thought that we would have to do to ensure that our students are educated. So that's going to require new ways of thinking, new ways of doing school, as we're all experiencing right now. So in response to their question, how are you as educators, especially educators of color, creating new patterns of excellence for our students of color? Maybe we could start with you, Minya, with this question.
Sure. I've had to go through a lot of thought about this question as I look at how I'm going to approach learning digitally for my kids this year. When I think about new patterns of learning, I first have to think about the old pattern of learning. Public education, we put our kids in a box. The school in itself can be a box. And that box of education that we see traditionally is actually built on white supremacy. And I can spew out some facts and some books for that too for you, but that box is built on white supremacy. So we've been expecting our Black and brown students to have excellence in a box that wasn't built for them. Right? So now we get to tear that box apart and we get to start over again. And so when I think about a new pattern of excellence for my students of color, I think I'm not even going to think about the old box. I have to have a completely new approach to learning. So knowing who my students are, giving them choice, first and foremost, having the mindset to believe in the excellence that is in each and every one of them that I know is there, that they know is there, that their parents know are there, and starting from that as my ground, as my level zero, my ground zero. So I can't start with the old pattern. I can't take the old patterns and try to force them into this new way of learning because it doesn't work. I need to start fresh by ripping that box apart and letting my kids be free as learners and me be free as a teacher, because I think that I've been accustomed to that box as well, and I have to be mindful of that too. So a little heart check and a mind check for me. But that's how I look at patterns of excellence changing for kids.
Thank you for that. I'd like to shift to Dr. Santos as I think about your role as an assistant superintendent, but also as your role mentoring the next generation, or quite frankly, the current generation of administrators that are before us. How are you thinking about creating new patterns of excellence?
I think the new patterns start, especially in my role, is having that opportunity to develop policy, equity policy. And, I'm asking all our parents out there is go to your district webpage. Do you and does your district have an equity, page or a policy? Are they living that policy, or are they just putting it on paper and then saying that they are? I think it's important that you identify what that policy is and then reminding others. And for me, it was a reminder in my current district where I noticed we didn't have one. And how could I be an equity, an equity broker? And I'll explain that in a second, and not be able to have that equity policy in place, giving those, as I mentioned earlier, students an opportunity what they need to be successful. That's in a nutshell equity. Of course, you always have your equity bystander to live in silence, and then you have your that advocate, that equity advocate who speaks up. But it's that broker who creates policy, who's creating actual documentation that could be followed, but also mentoring. And for myself and the leadership team that I have in Calza, we work with all of our brothers and sisters in trying to develop the next administrator who again, as people of color, we have to overcome so much. So we need that safe space for us to share. But we also recognize that we need to work that much harder, because we know how much harder our students need to work in order to achieve the greatness that awaits them. So I think mentoring for us is a key aspect in that future, in developing the new patterns, and then asking our teachers and asking our educators where you're working now, is this good enough for your own children? Is the school and the actions that you're putting on display on a regular basis good enough? And if you believe that they are, then you're doing the right thing. But if you think you can do more, then it's time to step it up and move it one notch higher.
Thank you, Dr. Santos. And I want to shift over to Blaine here, as I was reading off your bio, and the incredible work that you've done, particularly in increasing the A through G at your school site and the accreditation. It seems like you are already engaging in the work and creating a new standard of excellence. Can you talk to us a little bit about this particular question? How do you see this? How do you see your work going forward in this opportunity that we have before us to really dig our heels in around this equity piece?
Well, I think the question of excellence starts with yourself, right? You can't really address a community, expect students to be excellent. You can't expect your staff to be excellent. You can't expect parents to respond through excellence if you yourself aren't reflecting on your own vulnerabilities, your own, I want to say, what you're questioning about your own ability. It starts with yourself, and then, asking for that critical conversation from others and feedback from others, and creating those spaces where people can give you feedback. Look, as a leader, you have to be very comfortable in your skin and understand that, you don't have all the answers, and that the people that surround you, either you create circles of trust, critical masses of folks who can give you the feedback you need to be that equity and culturally responsive leader, or you can ask for people randomly and say, hey, I need feedback on what I'm doing right, but most importantly, what I'm doing wrong. And so I think that's where it starts. You mentioned some things in terms of change leadership that happened in my last position as principal at Dominguez High School. And yes, I think that came with just creating a culture of excellence, but also culture around building assets in your community. I think the most important thing a leader can do is build trust. And I think that trust is a critical component and a pillar of excellence. You have to build trust in yourself. You have to build trust in other people, because as a leader, people have to believe that they can follow what you're putting out there and what you're modeling. And so that's where it really starts with yourself. So, the work around supporting, students really has a lot to do with, addressing your own attitudes, your behaviors, your belief system. You have to reflect on your belief system, your personal assumptions about the community. And we have to be honest with ourselves. You can't be honest. You can't be excellent as a leader or as a teacher or as a student unless you address the real implicit bias you have about your own community, and really understand, the real challenges that we face as a community of color. Within a community of color, you have diversity within, your Latino community. You have diversity within your Black community. You have diversity within your Asian community. And you need to understand the linguistic and cultural differences of each one to really understand how you're going to really extract the excellence from everybody, because no one wants to follow anybody who doesn't understand them first. So that has a lot to do with your own personal work. I love what Dr. Santos was talking about, about really addressing, some systems around policy, but you really have to address the structural issues that Menia was talking about that have been built to work against people of color, and really believe that despite all those challenges, that we can really come together as a community and change what the current reality is. And I really believe that where we're at right now in education is an opportunity for us, number one, to truly move into the 21st century, which we haven't been talking about for the past 20 years. We've been saying we're in the 21st century, but really we haven't, because a lot of leaders and a lot of teachers are still, practicing antiquated approaches to education that we still did when I was in school in the 80s and the 90s. So, it's an opportunity for us to reinvent schooling. I love the opportunity now that we have, to really build at the K-12, at the higher ed and at the K-12 level, to build in the curriculum around ethnic studies. But let's be clear: ethnic studies will not work unless it's across the curriculum. Ethnic studies will not work in one class that only a select group of kids are going to take. So we have to make sure, as a leader, you create structures and systems and collaboration where teachers are working to understand the cultural diversity and the linguistic diversity within your community, and weave that into the teaching and the learning that's happening, not just for students, but also professional development that's happening for your teachers. So just going back to what you're asking, I think it's really important to really understand yourself. How you're going to address your community really has to do with yourself, and really thinking about how you need to work with others to build that trust. And that's the most important thing you can do is build trust, because with that trust comes confidence. And once you have a group of people of color who are confident, man, nothing can stop us. Nothing will stop us, you know.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh
I
yeah.
want to celebrate Dr. Santos. You know, he's a wonderful mentor. I went through the 2 years of the mentor and protege program through CALSA, and that mentor, he taught me a lot about being vulnerable, about being open, about being reflective, and those structures and those systems we need a lot more of in order for us to grow collectively. So we can grow by ourselves, but we need to grow together in order for and together.
You know what? I'm gonna jump in here because I love what you're saying.
But I'm gonna have you wrap it up.
I'm gonna have you wrap it up.
Go ahead, put that in,
I'm
Dr.
done.
Juan.
Thank you.
It was gonna be quick. But I think you hit the, both of us or all three of us are hitting it. When Menya, she's recreating her teaching to build that confidence of which that Blaine Watson just said, that is what's needed in order for me to get that pride. And as we start building up stronger leaders and we start recruiting people of color so that our classroom, it wouldn't be like the exception to the rule, like our mom said, like this year he has a Black teacher. Really? He should have more than one. I'm hoping the course of a lifetime, not just, and that needs to be, it needs to always happen, because when they start seeing themselves in a position of leadership, they are imagining. And that's what we're trying to do. And I think in the right direction now, but policy, actions, behaviors, and how we feel about ourselves is the first stage. We shouldn't feel apologetic about who we are, what we believe in, our family love. We've always been about whole group and not about individuals, where now we're trying to say, you need to get yours. We want you to be the best version of you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you both. And we have so many questions to cover because our parents and our students, our student panelists gave us so much to think about. I want to hop in, and since we brought up the parents, and I want to bring in another parent question, as we're thinking about this opportunity to really partner with our parents. And Dr. Borrell talked a lot about ensuring that our parents are equipped in this new era to support what's happening in this virtual learning environment. So I want to ask the question, how are you training, equipping parents to support student learning during this pandemic and beyond? And let's hear from Menya Cole.
I'm getting really excited. The other panelists have my blood going, so this is exciting. So when you teach in a traditional setting in the school building, you can so easily not include your parents. Like, you can just teach and go through day by day and very easily not know if your parents are able to access the content your students are doing, not know if your parents understand the content, if your parents feel confident supporting their child. This is not the case anymore. Now I am teaching in your home every day. And so I have to partner with you. It's not like I get a chance to close my door and be in my own world anymore, which I don't do as a teacher, by the way, but I'm saying it's possible. So in order to really partner with parents to help them support their students, the first thing I do is I welcome them to the space. There are parents who like to be next to their kids when they're on the Zoom classes with me. That's fine. I know I've heard of teachers, there's memes going around like the parent shouldn't be there, let the kid. No, if your granny wants to sit next to you for this reading lesson, please, this is wonderful. In fact, for my class tomorrow for Share, we're sharing family members who we live with, because that is a part of our learning. That's how we access this content together. That way your family member knows what you're doing. And if they're not able to sit there with you and enjoy the lesson, I make it very accessible digitally. I'm available by phone, by email, by different apps. I let my parents know I am open and I'm here for you as your partner, because I am a content expert, but you are your child's expert. So we have to partner together to be successful. And I have to make sure you understand what's happening in the classroom every day for you to support your student in learning.
I love that. I love that so much, because I think about opportunities. Well, when I was teaching, and how often I would love for a parent to be alongside their student and kind of engage and see what we're doing in the classroom. And this is an opportunity for us to harness and be like, this is great. Like, let's do this work together. I appreciate that. Mr. Watson, let's hear from you. How have you been engaging, and how are you equipping parents to engage in this educational experience?
Thank you. I think one of the most important things we can do, I've been using this motto since we pivoted to distance learning, we have to distance love before we can distance learn. And that distance love doesn't only apply to our students. We have to love on our parents and really give our parents grace, understand where they're coming from, and understand the different challenges they're facing, especially in communities of color, especially in communities of high poverty. You know, a lot of our parents may not have the access that they desire or they need really to engage at the level that our students deserve. So, you know, we have to make sure that we are patient and we're supportive of them, making sure that we're creating opportunities for parents, to understand the digital tools that we're utilizing to deliver the instruction and also to deliver the feedback and the information is important, right? More important than before. We have to make sure that communication channels are open and that we're asking for feedback from our parents about how the communication is working for them, how the tools are working for them at home. You know, making sure that they have the resources available. One of the most important things, I'm actually sitting right behind or in front of my son's working space. I have a 7-year-old who started second grade 2 days ago. And one of the things I really appreciate about his district is that, you know, they've been in very, very open communication with us parents about what we need, asking us what we need. And I think that's the most important thing we can do is just asking parents, what is it that you need? And how can we better provide you with the resources that you need in order for your students to be engaged? And understand that, you know, there are challenges with language, there's challenges with education, there's challenges with, you know, the digital divide that really exists, not just for students, but for parents. And we have to have the humility and the empathy to make sure that we're thinking through all those veins to make sure that we're delivering the best possible product to our community. I mentioned product because as educators and as an institution, our product is education. Is teaching and learning. And we have to, I don't mean to mention a business model, a business approach, but really, we need to think of it as a product that we are providing to our community. And we have to provide an excellent product, because if not, you know, they're not going to come back, right? So we have to make sure that we're thinking about how to always improve in our customer service, improve in our communication, and improve in how we're delivering ultimately the learning and teaching for our parents and for our students.
I love that. We have to learn how to distance love before we can distance learn. Absolutely. Exercising that empathy, ensuring that our parents have what they need. And then once they request it, ensuring that we're following up and making sure that they're getting exactly what they asked for. I'm actually going to pose the next question, but we can start off with Dr. Santos with this question. Miss Jones, Felicia Jones, talked about how her son, when he got to be a certain age, he wanted to challenge authority, and how that could have been a very negative outcome. As an African-American boy, we already know the school to prison pipeline. We understand that it starts with these disproportionate suspensions and expulsions. And what that particular leader of color did, that principal did, was instead of taking that as a challenge and an opportunity to chastise or to, you know, push him out. And also, I also don't want to gloss over the point that girls, particularly African-American girls, are more harshly punished as well in our public education system. But in this particular case, he took this as an opportunity, as she said, to cultivate his leadership. So this particular question, I want to bring up this third question from our parents, was how will you look differently? And she talked about disassociating punishment and student behavior and really looking at why they may be acting out. But how will you look deeper into the needs of students when they act out instead of resorting to punishment? As we thinking about, like Minya Cole said, like getting rid of that box, right? This is our opportunity to create something different. How should we be thinking about looking deeper into the needs of students when they act out instead of resorting to punishment? And we'll leave with you, Dr. Santos.
You know what, I'm very fortunate where I'm at here in Lawndale, where we have taken equity to the next level. We have social workers at every single one of our schools. More so, we have a relationship with USC, sorry, go Bruins, but we have a relationship with that university so that we could provide additional interns so that our students get exactly what they need. And And I think that's the first opportunity, is to listen to what's happening to our students, hear what's going on, and then let's help them so that they can actually focus in the classroom. And I think it's understand your biases. I mean, to admit that you're not biased, or to, as you hear those people often say, well, you know, when I see my students, I'm colorblind. No, that's not helping the situation. You have to acknowledge that a student is Black or brown, or, you know, struggling with the language. You have to acknowledge that first. I think that's first and foremost. Understand who your kids are, and then listen to what's going on. What is the real issue? What is going on? Have you had a communication with the parents? And to briefly answer the question before, it's, you know, are we providing that extension of opportunity for our parents? Are we listening to them? And in addition, listening to our students. Are we allowing them to find their voice? Well, we're sitting there saying to, you know, you can speak up for yourself, but yet we have to have a conversation with our own kids. I've had one with my son recently where I have to tell him about, when you're pulled over, this is what you got to do. You see, it's interesting because we're like telling them to use your voice, but then and so we need to teach them, our students, how to continue to be themselves, and at the same time be able to control all those frustrations by allowing them an opportunity to vent that. So I wish that in our schools, which we're doing here, we continue to provide that opportunity to listen to you, to work through those issues that maybe you're having, or just questions that you have. And it's okay. It's okay to ask why. Why are we doing this? Well, because whereas opposed you and I, when we grew up, when our parents said, you know, why? Because I said, oh, okay. That's not the case anymore. So it's important that we listen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also want to remind the folks who are listening to us to share this out. This is a great discussion. If you're a parent, other parents should be hearing this. If you're an educator and you want to share what we're hearing from our student and from our parents and how our educators are responding to that, I invite you to share this link. I'd also like to pose this question to Minya, as you think about this, because you're the very first line, right? You're generally where the behaviors happen, and then you make the determination about what happens next. Let's bring that question up again. How will you look deeper, or are you? Because it sounds like you're in your practice and being culturally responsive, you're thinking about these things, you're exercising these things already. How are you doing that? And how will you continue to look deeper into the needs of students when they act out instead of resorting to punishment or punitive measures?
I think just the way the question's worded, when they act out, it's important for educators to separate the action from the child. It's a child, right? We are not just our actions, okay? So a child can make a choice that leads to another choice or leads to some kind of consequence, but they're separate, and that's important to do on a daily basis. I consider the who before I consider like the why, right? So if I know the who, if I know the child, then I can better understand the why behind the action. So that kind of goes back to what we started talking about earlier, is, do you know your students? Do they know that you know them? And if they do, then you have a lot less likely of a chance of students acting out. But because they're kids, they will make some choices that maybe are breaches in your classroom. And when that happens, you separate the action from the child. And one thing that I do in my classroom is I ask them why. Like, why do you think you made that choice? Because I need them to know they can separate their action from who they are as a person. Because I can't tell you the number of students I've had who say, oh, I'm bad, or I used to be bad. No, that's not who you are, right? Let's separate that. That's a choice, but let's separate that. In addition to that, I also make sure I partner with parents. When you know your parents and your parents know that you love their baby, they are supporting you in your approach to their students' management of their behavior. I call my parents, not as a threat to my students, but as a partner in this process. So I discuss with my parents of my students, this is the action that I think is going to be the best route to take in terms of this child's behavior. What are you thinking about that? Because we need to do this together. And when we do it together, it just really makes for huge success in the classroom. I can say that I operate like a Zen classroom is what we call it. And we have a relaxation station, waterfalls, a place to take off your shoes when you know you need to just take a break before you make a choice that you don't want to make. And that choice also helps kids be able to operate in ways where they can just not even get to the act out part. But if they do get to the act out part, separate the action from the child and partner with that parent.
Thank you. I I actually want to be in 5th grade so I can be in your classroom. And yeah, I'm so excited. I'm like a Zen room with a waterfall. That is wonderful. That was not my 5th grade experience. Although I had a wonderful 5th grade teacher, just in case she's watching. I did not have a Zen classroom with a waterfall. I think that is wonderful. And I also think that that speaks to the real needs, right? And ways that we should be thinking differently. I want to pose the same question to Mr. Watson. What are your thoughts on disassociating behavior and punishment and thinking about how we can really engage students when they are misbehaving?
I think I want to start off with something I've been using with staff for a few years now. We have to be quick to correct and slow to punish. And understanding that when students misbehave, we have to understand the root, like Menu was mentioning, also Dr. Santos mentioned it. The behavior comes from somewhere. A lot of our students are disproportionately affected by trauma. They're bringing it to school, and then something that a teacher is doing or something that's happening in the community or something experienced on their way to school is triggering that trauma. So as adults and as a principal and as a systems leader, we have to be very cognizant of the fact that we have to train teachers to learn how to recognize these behaviors as not something that is that's something that is the child's fault, but it's something that's endemic of what the child has experienced in their life. And that's important. As a leader, we are responsible. We're charged with educating students, our staff, and even parents around the certain behaviors that are going to present themselves in certain situations based on experiences that we know our students are disproportionately impacted by. Secondly, I think it's also our responsibility as leaders to build what I call, or to build asset building cultures, and something I tell staff all the time. I want hall friendly and asset building adults, and what I mean by that is we're quick to really identify the deficits not just in our kids, but we're quick to identify the deficits in ourselves and the deficits in the people that we work with. We need to shift our approach to people by looking at their virtues. What do they bring that are positive? What are their assets? And then every time, and if that person can identify what their assets are, our job is to affirm that asset or find assets for that person. Because you'll find, most often you'll find kids who can identify 3 deficits before they can identify that one thing that they're really good at in terms of their character. Right? That student's a strong team builder, that student's, a great public speaker. He may be loud, she may be loud, but that's a great characteristic and a skill set that not a lot of other students possess. So we need to flip the script in how we think about how we look at our kids, right? What is our lens? How are we looking at our kids and how are we looking at our parents, right? And building assets in them. So our job is to build an asset-based culture. Also, I love what Miss Felicia Jones said before. She said that the thing she really liked about the principal that her son was with is that he was identifying leadership opportunities for that child, or for her son in this case, inside and also in the external community. I think that's the most important thing an administrator and a teacher can do, especially with a child who is demonstrating issues around behavior. Put that child in a leadership position, charge them with the task of leading something and doing something. So use that energy positively, right? And constructively in a different space. But also that has to happen with that asset building right behind it, right? You can't just throw that kid out into the lion's den. You got to follow them in and throw all that protective coating around them in terms of assets. Well, I believe in you. This is what you're good at. And you're going to do a great job leading this initiative. You're going to do a great job in this focus group. You're going to do a great job in this club. I can't wait to see you finish this initiative on campus and empower them. I think that's the best way. That needs to happen at the end of every disciplinary conversation with the child. We have to figure out how we can team that kid up or tie that kid and connect them to something positive in terms of leadership on your campus or in the surrounding community.
I love it. And moving toward resolution, restorative ways to engage with our students. I want to shift us to commitments. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I'm seeing the comments roll in. I even saw a comment from one of the panelists that chimed in on this panel. So thank you all for just the thoughtfulness that with which you're approaching these questions. I want to move to our first commitment, and this is how we're going to do this. All of you won't necessarily be able to give a lengthy response to the commitment, but I will allow you to select which commitment that you would like to expound upon. So when I read the commitment, you will say whether or not you will commit to it as an educator, and then how you'll actually do it. So there are 4 commitments from our student and our parents, and one of them overlapped, and that's the first commitment. So the first commitment was, will you commit to increasing training, supporting administrators, counselors, and teachers of color? So I will pause here. And which one of you would like to provide a response to that other than just saying you will or you won't commit?
I'll go ahead and answer this one. I will make a commitment to increase, retain, support administrators, counselors, and teachers of color. And I plan to do that by using my own time and through the organization of CALSA and any individual who reaches out to me to provide them the guidance. Just like we would spend time with our own family members, you become part of my familia. And it's important that I listen to you and I communicate with you and see if you really understand, and lastly, prepare you for the response you're going to get as a person of color in the education system, but also to give you my number and share you're not alone. So I will make a commitment by being who I am and being a part of your compadre in this cause for us to get to where and what we deserve.
Mm-hmm. Others, you could just affirm or not your commitment to this request.
As a site leader, I will commit to building spaces, safe spaces for teachers and counselors of color, to recruiting, and also looking for creative ways to retain teachers in the classroom, but also retain their innovation, retain their creativity, and retain their belief in themselves and each other by having the critical conversations around social emotional learning for adults that oftentimes we miss, the mental health of adults that oftentimes we miss, and also opening up opportunities for growth, professional development and growth, because we all understand that educators of color are hungry for leadership. Not everybody wants official leadership title, but I really believe, and I've observed, that educators of color really want to be at the table, really want to help direct the ship. And we have to create those spaces and be vulnerable enough in our leadership to be able to bring them to the table and trust that we're all going in the same direction and we can count on them to help us get there.
Thank you. Thank you. Minya.
I'll do it really quick. I commit to retaining teachers of color and the various roles I play as a mentor and a coach, and to make sure that I especially assist these teachers in being able to manage their roles.
Thank you.
Educators.
Let's move on to our second commitment. So the second commitment, will you commit to ensuring that parents are seen as partners in the education process for their children? And I think that you, Minya, based on your previous answer, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you. I don't know if you want to speak to this particular commitment, but I am going to hold the rest of our panelists to just speaking in maybe one sentence in your affirmation or not of this particular commitment.
I definitely commit to ensuring that parents are seen as partners in the education process for their children, because it's something that I have to do every single day. As a parent and as an educator, I will specifically work towards this commitment by making sure that I find more innovative ways to have my parents' voices heard. For example, surveys, pulse checks, check-ins, quick little texts here and there, just to ensure that my parents feel welcomed as part of the process and that they also feel as though they're treated as experts in their decision-making for their child.
Thank you. Dr. Santos?
I made the commitment as well, and I know you're looking for time saving, so.
Thank you.
I also made the commitment to supporting parents in the educational process, making sure that they're learning with us, they're growing with us, and hopefully when COVID-19 shifts away, I'm going to say that very safely, shifts away from our current experience, I really can't wait to bring parents back in the classroom so they can see what learning and teaching looks like again.
Thank you. Let's move on to our third request for a commitment from our parents. Will you commit to being anti-racist, anti-biased, ultimately breaking down the systems of white supremacy that have plagued our educational system since the beginning? Who would like to jump in and provide a why and whether or not you will commit?
My why for committing to this third commitment is because as an equity-focused leader, it's my responsibility to build or confront and alter institutional bias. Also the limitations of student marginalization, and making sure that everybody on my campus and in my system understand that we have to continually work through the process of equity-focused change. It's not just a one and done. It has to happen through a cycle of improvement, but always through a very clear equity lens.
Thank you for that. Rest of our panelists, will you commit?
I commit.
I commit 100% with the sledgehammer. Students deserve it. We are going to knock it down into, as I've mentioned before, to be the broker, an equity broker, and races.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's bring up our fourth and final commitment. Will you commit to ensuring that all students have equitable access to quality learning environments based on their needs? I'll read that again. Will you commit to ensuring that all students have equitable access to quality learning environments based on their needs?
Yes.
Yes, I commit to ensuring that all of my students have equitable access to quality learning environments based on their needs, specifically by making sure I know what their needs are so I can best serve them.
And I also make that commitment to ensure our students have equitable access to a quality education by using my current position in both of the organizations that I serve to put people in a position that can make this change and also teach them how to be the change. So I make that full commitment.
And I make this commitment by continuing to build a capacity in teachers and counselors to really understand the individual needs, learning and social emotional needs of the students that we serve in our building.
Thank you all for being bold, for being transformational, and for committing not only to ensuring that we have the right counselors, the right teachers, the right administrators in front of our students, but to ensure that we are bringing along and working in community with our families, especially during this time. Thank you all for your courage, and thank you for stepping forward and exemplifying what we would like to see throughout our education systems. So thank you all, and have a wonderful evening. I'm going to shift over just to wrap us up and to talk about what's next. So thank you all for tuning in. And I also want to share a little bit about the Diversity and Leadership Institute and our growing coalition. The Charting the Course to Equity Coalition is committed to solving this issue of racial equity in K-12 educational leadership in California. Our mission at DLI is to create equitable outcomes for Black and Latinx students by building a movement of racially diverse and culturally competent public education leaders. Based on the challenges raised today, it's important that we keep this issue in the forefront by advocating and supporting laws and policies that promote racial equity, calling out inequities we see in our schools, demand that our public schools, both district and charter, are developing, implementing policies that support recruitment, hiring, and retaining educators of color. And Diversity and Leadership Institute is responding by launching a new fellowship for Black and Latinx aspiring administrators in the fall. And we're hosting convenings to highlight the successes and challenges that leaders of color face, ultimately to move forward solutions in policy and practice, and broadening the network of aspiring and current leaders of color throughout the state. And we're also committed to supporting the racial diversity, equity, and inclusion work of public schools and organizations. And lastly, we are growing and diversifying our coalition to make a broader impact. So if you're out there and you're listening and you're a part of an organization and you're interested in learning more about the work of the coalition or interested in being a part of our work, we invite you to join us. And to learn how, I'd like to invite Jalissa Johnson of Innovate Public Schools to share how you can get the word out and how you can continue to be engaged in the work of the Charting the Course to Equity Coalition and the Diversity and Leadership Institute. Jalissa, take it away.
Thank you. So tonight we heard from students, parents, and educators who spoke candidly and powerfully about issues of racial diversity, equity, and inclusion in the education leadership pipeline. Now it's time for you to get involved. We have 3 simple but important calls to action, and we're asking each of you to answer the calls. 1, sign up for our newsletter at www.diversityandleadership.org to stay engaged in our work. 2, follow us on Twitter at DIL_Institute and on Facebook at DIL Institute. And 3, share your story on social media. Tell us how issues of racial diversity, equity, and inclusion in public education have impacted your family, your community, or you personally during COVID-19. And when you do, tag us. Again, you can find us on Twitter at DIL_Institute and on Facebook at DIL Institute. As we close, I want to extend a special thank you to the Diversity and Leadership Institute and the Charter the Course to Equity Coalition for sponsoring tonight's event. I also want to thank our presenters and panelists for leading us in an important dialogue about the challenges our students and families of color are facing during this time. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank all of you, our esteemed guests, for streaming with us and being a part of this conversation. Tonight was just the tipping point of a much larger movement to address the deep and systemic inequities that exist for students, families, and educators of color. There is so much more to come, and we hope that you were inspired to take the journey with us. Thank you and good night.
Unmute yourself.
I was saying some really great stuff. I was just saying thank you all for tuning in. At one point, we had over 100 people tuned in, and I invite you to continue the conversation with us and do all of those things that Jalissa talked about. It's going to take all of us working together to ensure that we have racial diversity, equity, inclusion, and cultural competence in our public schools. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your evening.